San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books Author Q&A Series. I am Andrea Mendoza, a professor in the Department of Literature at UC San Diego, joining you from occupied Kumi Island, and I'm beyond honored to be a part of this series. Today, I'm very excited to facilitate this panel between two fantastic authors, Gabriela Garcia and Patricia Engel, about their recently published novels, Garcia's Of Women and Salt, and out from Flatiron Press, and Engel's Infinite Country from Avid Reader Press. And they also have the most beautiful covers I've seen ever. So please enjoy them as I hold them up. Gabriela Garcia, author of Women and Salt, is the recipient of a Rona Jaff Foundation Writers Award and a Steinbeck Fellowship from San Jose State University. Her fiction and poems have appeared in Best American Poetry, Tin House, Ziziva, Iowa Review, and many other venues. A daughter of immigrants from Mexico and Cuba, Garcia grew up in Miami. Of Women in Salt has been named a New York Times bestseller and a Good Morning America book club pick since its release this year. It is also her first published novel. Patricia Engel is a writer of Infinite Country. Also a New York Times bestseller, Infinite Country has been picked as part of Reese Witherspoon's book club, the Esquire Book Club, the Book of the Month, Indie Next, Amazon Best Book of the Month, and many more. Engel's other novels include The Veins of the Ocean, It's Not Love, It's Just Paris, and Vida. She has won the Dayton Literary Prize, the International Latino Book Award, the Florida Book Award, and the International Book Award. For Vida, Engel also was the first woman to be awarded Colombia's National Prize in Literature, the 2017 Premio Biblioteca de Narrativa Colombiana. Engel is also the recipient of multiple prestigious awards, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment of the Arts. Born to Colombian parents, Patricia teaches creative writing at the University of Miami. Of Women in Salt and Infinite Country, just to give an overview of both of these fantastic novels, intersect on the themes of the complex choices that are put on women who experience precarity and nebulosity of the diasporic experience, weaving together narratives about family, motherhood, and the histories and traumas that get passed down across and between generations. In Infinite Country, which opens up with a striking line, it was her idea to tie up a nun. The nun, we first meet Talia, a US-born daughter of Colombian immigrants and part of a mixed status family. She lives in Colombia with her father Mauro, and the novel tells of her desperate attempt to make a flight out of Colombia to be with her mother Elena in the United States. But the story zooms in on the lives of each member of Talia's family to tell a larger familial, political, and social history, eventually revealing its voice to be that of her oldest sister, Karina. Of Women in Salt by Gabriela Garcia similarly gives us glimpses into the interior lives of women across generations and across experiences of diaspora, telling the story of a Cuban-American woman in her 20s, Jeanette, her relationship with her mother, Carmen, and how their lives coalesce with that of a young El Salvadoran woman and girl named Ana. And each narrative, what I think is a recurring and poignant message, is that the lives and voices of their characters, especially the women characters, cannot be simply, neatly, or coherently encompassed by the term immigrant experience. And without further ado, I am so excited and genuinely humbled to welcome and be in conversation with Gabriela Garcia and Patricia Engel. Bienvenidas.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. And I just want to say congratulations to Gabriela on her beautiful first book. And I'm already looking forward to what's next from her.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so delighted to be here with both of you.
Thank you both so much for joining us today. Patricia, Gabriela, I so much enjoyed both of your novels. I read them actually both in a matter of hours, and each resonated with my own life and experiences with being part of the Latinx diaspora. And I'm so looking forward to getting to know the both of you through this Q&A. I want to begin by asking you, what led each of you to make the choice of writing your novels, especially about these particular themes in this particular time?
I can start. Yeah, I feel like I have different origin points for the novel. I started writing some of it before I ever thought it was going to be a novel. I was working as an organizer for various organizations for several years, and I was working in particular with women in detention, doing like deportation defense work. And I started sort of writing some of what would eventually become the novel during that time. Not really thinking that it was going to be a novel. I think it was just sort of my way of processing some of the work that I was doing. So that's the origin point for some of that. And then other pieces of it came to me at different times. Some of it was when I grew up traveling a lot back and forth to Cuba. And some of it came from like a museum exhibit that I went to that had these letters from Victor Hugo to Cuban workers in the 19th century. And that sort of inspired me to think about the interplay between the literary and the political consciousness of the time. And that's the origin point for some of that. But basically, I knew right away that I wanted to write a book that was in the voices of only women, and sort of all surviving within these very patriarchal conditions. But I wanted to only center the women during that time. And so, I started to sort of thread all of those different narratives around all of these different things that I was thinking about and sort of obsessed with. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Patricia, what about you? What about the writing of Infinite Country? How did you come to make this choice?
So Infinite Country is my fourth book, and all of my books have been about immigration, diaspora, and have explored that territory in different ways because it's really my world, and it's the only world that I know, or it's the only way that I've experienced the world is as a product of diaspora. So my first three books really focused on individual characters and went deep into, the intimacy and the psyche of one character in particular. So I knew that with Infinite Country, I wanted to look at the collective experience of a family in the process of immigrating. A family that has it very much in the present moment, not something that happens already in the last generation, not something that's already over and done with, but that it's still ongoing as a condition. And so I wanted to look at how that collective experience affects a single family, but in a way that could also get into the private experiences of each of those family members. So those were my goals for the project when I started thinking about it. And I started thinking about it a long, long time ago when I was working on other books at the time that, I sort of tackled first. But Infinite Countries, Genesis goes very far back, because truly, it's probably the story that's closest to me, in the sense that I grew up in a family experiencing the condition of immigration, and that's always been my world, my communities, the people closest to me. But it took me a while to really synthesize how I was going to go about it and create a story that felt both expansive and essential and urgent and small, and in a way that was compact and feverish and felt like a personal testimony in a certain way, like someone sharing, private conversation with you, if you happen to strike up a conversation with them and they just let it all out. So that took a little maneuvering, which is of course the fun part of writing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, for those fantastic answers. The way that I, have thought about both of your novels in some ways, but, they obviously have a lot of divergences, is that they're made up of a bunch of like intimate constellations or constellations of intimacy that branch out into these wider historical, literary, and mythical connections that are made between the characters and the larger worlds that they're inhabiting. And one of the things that that I was really struck by was that, both of your novels are told from these multiple like perspectives, or maybe we can even call them multiple types of storytelling voices, if you'll allow me that term. For instance, in Infinite Country, we eventually do find out that the story is told from the point of view of Elena and Mauro's eldest daughter, Karina, but the chapters are divided as like glimpses into the interior lives, or as much as can be, of the interior lives of every family member, especially Talia. And of Women in Salt, shifts perspectives among the women of Jeanette's family, alongside those of Gloria and Ana, the two Central American immigrants that Jeanette's and her mother's lives intersect with. And that also jumps across different timelines, I think over a span of nearly over 100 years. Am I right? It begins in the late 19th century. I also thought it was like really fascinating that you begin in the late 19th century, have all of these, references to Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, and obviously the name of the protagonist is Jeannette, which recalls to me, maybe I'm wrong about this, Jean Valjean. So there's still all these multiple forms of storytelling that are imbuing the meaning behind each character's voice and sort of the types of things that motivate them. How did you come to decide on the structures of your works? Was it something planned out from the beginning, or did these particular stories and characters sort of compel you to gravitate toward that style?
Yeah, I think, when I started writing this, I sort of knew that I didn't want to write in a, traditional quote unquote Western storytelling structure. I think, often what we sort of accept as traditional structure, like rising action and conflict and falling action, the sort of bell curve structure, is based in like Aristotle and a lot of like, European sort of storytelling forms. And I think there's just like so many other ways of telling a story. And, I think about the ways, for example, that storytelling happens when I'm just like sitting around the table with my family, and somebody starts on one thread and maybe that bleeds into a past story, and that just like connects to something else. And the story kind of goes in all these different directions. And I sort of wanted to challenge myself to write something that felt that way, that was like sort of associative instead of linear. And, I wanted it to sort of have the feel of historical accounts and varying perspectives, in terms of there being spaces of unknowing, in terms of stories shifting once you shift perspective. I wanted it to kind of have that feeling, especially since a lot of the book is about stories and who gets to tell them, and whether they can be reclaimed or what happens when you don't have access to certain stories or historical accounts. So I knew that I sort of wanted it to have that fractured feeling. Mm-hmm.
In the case of Infinite Country, it's there's questions of assembly, right? How to put the story together and how to manage time. Infinite Country takes place over 20 or so years, but then there's also the questions of where to leave the eye in terms of which characters you follow at which point in the story and putting it together. But the voice, as you find out at a certain point in the story, belongs to the eldest sister in the story, who, in my mind, I guess as a writer, I feel like there's always somebody in each family like that is kind of either the family storyteller or the family memory, the one who is the most interested and is the person that the others are more likely to go to ask, hey, how did this happen in our family? When did this happen? And it's kind of like the family archive in a lot of ways. So Karina, you find out, is that person. And there's always a question of finding your narrator, in the sense that it has to be a person who, number one, cares enough to tell the story, but also is the person who has the knowledge, who has the access to the information in order to tell it in a way that is truthful and expansive and can carry the narrative. So Karina was that person. At the same time, she removes herself from the story at certain points and centers other family members. As you mentioned before, the story opens with Talia, her younger sister. So she starts out by centering her sister, who's really, kind of the focal point of the family for a variety of reasons, mainly by her absence. And then centers her mother and her father and their story. And it's only much later when she, announces herself and inserts herself and locates herself within the larger family story that you begin to understand why this testimony is urgent and important. But it also speaks to the need for stories, in the sense that often in immigration, and in the case of the Colombian diaspora, of which I write, which is one of the largest diasporas in the world, there's more than 5 million Colombians living outside of Colombia. Very often what you take with you are your stories and maybe nothing else. And you lose them very quickly, maybe even quicker than you lose language if you don't use it or pass it on or practice it. And the only way that they will survive is in their repetition, right? And sharing that again and again and again. Otherwise they're lost, and they're lost fast. So it also speaks to that need, to the need to tell your own stories, to the need to announce your origins and how you came to be, in order to leave record, because sometimes that's all you've got.
I mean, I think both of your novels are really invested in this, what you just spoke about, Patricia, what it means to have a record of a memory, what it means to have a record of storytelling, but at the same time, some of the most tense moments seem to be in places where there are absences of memory or things are not getting repeated. What is it? What is the connection that you both see being made between the possibility of memory, or the impossibility of memory in some cases, and telling one's own history? Especially, I think back, Gabriela, your story deals a lot with different forms of addiction and the ways that different characters try to manage not just their own addiction, but the addiction of others throughout, as a kind of manifestation of things that maybe are not being told, not being passed down, or cannot be told in certain moments. And that, kind of does get sort of tangled up with this larger and more complicated, not to be reductive, experience of immigration, experience of diaspora. So I guess my question, just to come back to it, is, how do you envision this tension between memory storytelling and history, as part of what moves both of the narratives forward?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about stories and memory and perspective when I was writing this. And, you know, one of the things that I was really struck by when I was doing this research into the thread of the narrative that takes place in the 19th century around tobacco workers who were read all of these different books, including like Victor Hugo's book and all of that. You know, I was really struck when I was seeing all of these books that became really popular in the tobacco workshops. You know, so many of them were basically written by European white men or, you know, European descended white men in Cuba. And, you know, I was exploring this sort of character who in some ways finds a kind of freedom or like sort of re-understanding of her life through these books, while at the same time being very aware that she's getting this very specific perspective, you know? And I think that sort of opened me up to the larger conversation in the book about the ways that, you know, who gets to tell a story and how it's shaped by the storyteller sort of shapes all of these lives, you know? And I think in the same way that that's happening in that earlier chapter, like that's sort of happening throughout history. And a lot of the stuff that these characters don't know about their past or about their ancestors does have a great effect, you know, on their current lives. But they're not able to sort of see that and work through that. And I think that's true of any historical account, you know, that which we don't want to see or look at does end up playing a huge role in a lot of social dynamics. And so I was thinking a lot about that, you know, and a lot of the sort of unresolved tension in this family is because people are unable to see the other person really, you know, or to really understand their perspective or even to go there. And so that's the sort of center of a lot of that like tension and conflict.
Yeah, I think when it comes to storytelling, so much of it gets lost by trauma, and that happens on a personal level, but it also happens on a cultural level and even a national level. And trauma creates omissions because, of course, the hardest things to speak about are those things that have hurt us so deeply. And this happens not only in terms of the way that people's personal lives are shaped, but also the way that entire cultural histories are shaped. And there are things that we assume to be truthful, but they're no more impressionistic than other family stories or traditional knowledge or ancestral knowledge and things that we might call myth or folklore or anything like that. So the idea of storytelling and which stories you choose to repeat and which you leave out, whether it be because it's too painful or in order to protect others, you know, from that pain, is also important to consider in how we describe our existence to one another. And then with that, with the frame we are provided by the stories that have been told to us, the narratives that we have received, how we then learn to see ourselves in our own experience and how we fit into this, you know, human grid. So storytelling is not only essential, but it's also so imperfect, and it's you know, constantly a work in progress. But that's also what I think gives it its power and also its vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think, Patricia, when it is revealed in the novel that it's Karina telling these stories, what I think about too is, you know, it's interesting, as you said before, she centers Talia precisely because she was an absence in much of her young life. She talks a lot, actually, I think more about Mauro at certain points in the novel than about her own mother, because he was absent. And the kind of question of absence, I think, does recur in both novels. But I want to ask specifically Patricia about the kind of absence that is the absence of patrilineal inheritance in the novel, which I think occurs too in Of Women in Salt. But the father Mauro, in particular, in Infinite Country, has an estranged relationship to his mother, who kicked him out of her house, which led him to experience unstable, sometimes dangerous living conditions throughout most of his young life. And though he has very fleeting paternal figures, the most consistent parental figure that he does end up having is, I would argue, Elena's mother, Perla, in so many words. Meanwhile, Elena's father was also absent from her life. So I guess the most strong parental figure for both of these two parents is the matriarch, Perla. And her, eventual absence also becomes a point of a lot of devastation. So what is it, I guess, that you wanted to express about these damaged, estranged, or absent paternities, especially because it's also revealed that Mauro himself kind of struggles with the role of being a father. And I ask this because you just spoke about, how not only is memory and storytelling complex because it's already difficult to get at something called the truth of the matter, but trauma further complicates it. And I wondered, how does this difficulty connect to these damaged paternities that seem to loom throughout the novel?
Well, the situations like that with an absent father are extremely typical. I did not have to reach far to imagine such a situation. And so often women are tasked with being not only the nurturers and the caregivers and the providers of love and security, but the providers, the providers. You see it very often in the United States, where maybe families come together, as in the case of the Family in Infinite Country, and the immigration system actually targets fathers, to have them removed, with the idea that will, lead to the disintegration of the family unit. The family will just surrender, and maybe they'll just go back up and go. So this is something that's interesting to me, in the sense that it becomes a stage for women to really show, the spectrum of their capacity. But also it challenges all those ideas that what it means to be a family, where the strength of a family truly comes from. And also the burdens that we place on fathers as well, the burdens of masculinity, and how that's also a tall order for many men, including, as you mentioned, Mauro, who struggles with that and becomes an absent father himself, due to circumstances, and that's something that he tries to remedy in some ways or another.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to extend the similar question to Gabriela, too, because I see that we're just about the end of time. But Gabriela, in your novel, you actually mark an absence of not a patrilineality, but a maternilineality. In the first page of Women in Salt, you give us a matrilineal family tree, too, actually. In the middle, though, where the main character's grandmother, Janet's grandmother, Dolores' mother is meant to be, we only see an X. And the novel throughout dwells a lot on broken mother-daughter relationships. So I wondered what that X said about the relationship that Dolores had with her mother and her mother with her own mother, as well as the relationship between Dolores and Maria Isabel, her grandmother, who is one of the voices that tells the story.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I sort of was pointing to that kind of space of unknowing in historical accounts or in stories, and that X is sort of that space of unknowing. Like I knew I didn't want to write a sort of traditional saga that goes like deeply into detail about every character's family lineage. I just wanted these sort of glimpses, and you're right. There are these sort of fractures and complicated mother-daughter relationships. I think I was sort of interested in writing against some of the tropes that exist about motherhood, in particular immigrant mothers. There's the trope of the all sacrificing, all suffering immigrant mother. And not that the mothers in the book don't like suffer or sacrifice, but there's so much more than that. And they have a complicated relationship to that sort of what's been imposed on them, So like there's the character of Gloria, who at times wonders if she even wants to be a mother, and a point where she sort of resents that, she's forced to sacrifice, really. Like, it's not something that she wants to do. It's sort of imposed by the conditions of her life. And so, all of the mothers are sort of grappling with this complexity. And a lot of it is about what circumstances have sort of forced them into, rather than sort of romanticizing or creating this noble figure of like immigrant sacrifice and suffering,
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I have one last question for the both of you, as we have a couple minutes remaining. Both of your novels dwell a lot on experiences that involve animals. Maybe I just picked up on this because I like reading about animals, but we have jaguars, birds, cats, pumas, snakes, and all other sorts of creatures, folkloric and real. Can you talk a bit about why these animals become part of the internal and external worlds of your characters? And as an add-on, both of these novels are fantastic, but what is something that you're reading right now that you would like to recommend to our audiences?
I love that you asked that question, like as my cat was walking behind me. Yeah, I write poetry in addition to fiction. And I think a lot of the same way that I approach poetry, like around images that are sort of stuck in my head and that make me think about a larger, idea, is sort of the same way that I approach my fiction. And, some of these animal figures in the book, I think, come from that. They were just sort of images in my mind, sometimes based on real things. Like there's a point where there's a panther in a house, and I sort of got that idea from an article that I read about basically a bunch of like wild animals that were taken from someone's home, and the neighbors said they had no idea that they were there and whatever. And so, a lot of it I sort of was just pulling from these like images that existed from me. And as far as books, well, I finished Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, which I really loved. Like, it's just a really, really fascinating conversation about motherhood and womanhood, and is centered around a family, basically a detransitioned woman, her former partner, and a cis woman raising a baby together. And it's just really good. Yeah.
About the animals. Okay. So as you can see on the cover of Infinite Country, there's a jaguar and a snake and the condor, and those are animals that, figure prominently in the traditional history across the Americas. A lot of Infinite Country is set in Bogota, which is the territory of the Muisca civilization, who are one of the 4 advanced civilizations of the Americas. Most people are more familiar with the Mayas or Incas or Aztecs, but the Muisca were right up there. And my mother is from Bogota and has Muisca ancestry, so I grew up with a lot of the stories. And then through just time that I spent in Colombia, I've learned more. So there's a lot of stories that are particular to the region of Cundinamarca, Bogota, but there's also ones that are particular to other parts of the country as well. And Infinite Country is really a story about movement, about migration, which is the natural order of the world. And just like any other species, humans are prone to movement to ensure their own survival and provide for themselves and for their young, like any other human creature, in any other animal species, right? So I'm always interested in the connections that the human species has with the natural world as well. And what, a lot of those stories about the animals are stories that teach us about our place in the world, our place among the other species, and what we came here for, really. So those have always moved me, and it's about our connections to the land, and not just in a geographic sense.
It's so beautiful. Thank you so much to the both of you, Patricia and Gabriela, for taking this time to talk with me today, and for letting me gush about your beautiful writing. It has been a genuine pleasure to get to know the both of you on this panel for the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books author Q&A series. Gabriela Garcia's Of Women and Salt and Patricia Engel's Infinite Country are both available at your local booksellers, and from our indie bookseller partners at bookshop.org/indie bookshop/shop/SDFOB. Once again, that is bookshop.org/shop/SDFOB. Please consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. And you can continue to join us for a full program of author panels, exciting demonstrations, and live entertainment streamed entirely online. All videos will be available on sdfestivalofbooks.com. Again, I'm Andrea Mendoza, and thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.